It's human nature to look for the easiest path, the safest move, the least resistance. So when it comes to change, most people hesitate. They tell themselves it's too hard, it feels uncomfortable, or they're not ready yet. And they're right, change is uncomfortable, but here's what they're not seeing. Staying stuck is uncomfortable too. They think they're choosing comfort by staying where they are, but that comfort, it's temporary. It's surface level, because underneath there's tension, there's frustration. There's a slow burn of regret building day by day. The pain of staying stuck isn't loud. But it's real, and over time it gets heavier. I've met a lot of people who said they weren't ready to make a change, and 5 years later they're in the exact same spot. Except now they're more discouraged, more frustrated, less confident. Because they chose to avoid one kind of discomfort and ended up with another, the kind that doesn't lead anywhere. So here's the truth: you don't get to avoid discomfort, you only get to choose which kind you're willing to face, the short-term discomfort of growth, or the long-term discomfort of being stuck. One leads to something better. The other just repeats more of the same. I wanna talk about what happens when you avoid change, and what happens when you face it head on. We'll talk about resistance, repetition, and how stuckness isn't neutral. It's costly. Most of all, we'll break down the mindset that helps you stop waiting and start moving, because if it's going to be hard either way, make it the kind of hard that takes you somewhere. Change feels risky. That's what stops most people. They don't know what's on the other side. They worry it won't work. They worry they'll fail. They worry they'll look foolish. So instead of moving forward, they do what they've always done. They stay where it's familiar. And familiar starts to feel like safe. But here's the truth: familiar isn't the same as safe. Repeating the same patterns, the same habits, the same mistakes, that's risky too. In fact, it might be even riskier, because while change might cost you discomfort in the short term, staying stuck costs you growth in the long term. It's like standing on a sinking ship and refusing to swim because you're afraid of the water. Sure, swimming might feel dangerous, but staying put guarantees you go down. And that's what a lot of people do. They sit in jobs they don't like, relationships that drain them, habits that keep them small, not because it's good but because it's known. They say at least they know what to expect, but is predictability really worth the price of progress? Is knowing what tomorrow looks like worth giving up the chance to grow? Because when you keep doing what you've always done, you're not just avoiding risk, you're accepting a different kind of failure. The slow kind, the silent kind, the kind that looks like safety until it's too late. I've talked to people who've lived in frustration for years, not because they didn't have options, but because they didn't want to face the unknown, and every year they waited, the cost went up, the habit got stronger, the confidence got weaker. The belief that change was even possible started to fade, not because it wasn't possible, but because they rehearsed stuckness for so long it became normal. And here's the part nobody tells you: staying the same is still a decision. It's a decision with consequences. You might not feel them today, but you will over time. The effects of not changing pile up. And one day you look around and realize you didn't avoid pain. You just delayed it, and it's bigger now. So yes, change takes courage. It takes honesty, it takes discomfort, but so does repeating the same year of your life 5 times in a row and calling it a journey. So does living with the quiet thought, I could have done more. If you're going to feel the weight either way, at least make it the kind that leads somewhere. You can't grow without resistance. That's not just an idea, it's how life works. You don't build muscle without weight. You don't get stronger by avoiding pressure. Growth and resistance are partners. You want one, you gotta go through the other. But most people treat resistance like a stop sign. The moment something feels uncomfortable, they back off. They assume it must be wrong, that it isn't for them, or that it shouldn't be this hard. But what if the resistance isn't a sign to stop, but a sign that you're finally doing something that matters? What if it's not a red light, but a confirmation? Think about lifting weights. If it's easy, it's not doing much. But when it burns, when your muscles start shaking, that's when the growth begins. And the same is true in life. When you stretch yourself, start a new habit, leave an old mindset, walk away from comfort, you feel that tension, that's resistance. And that's also where the growth lives. See, nobody evolves inside their comfort zone. You don't become more by staying where everything is familiar. You become more by walking into the unknown and staying there long enough to adapt. And yes, it's uncomfortable. It's supposed to be that's the point. Growth means you're leaving behind what was automatic. What was easy, you're building new reflexes, new standards, new patterns. And that takes effort, it takes repetition, it takes pushing through moments where quitting would be easier. But if you stay with it, if you let the resistance shape you instead of scare you, you come out different on the other side. People want transformation. But they want it without pressure, they want results without resistance, but you cannot skip that part. The tension is part of the process, it's not a problem, it's the path. Discomfort is the tuition you pay for becoming someone new. So the next time you feel resistance, the next time change feels hard, awkward, unfamiliar, don't panic, don't run, that's the stretch. That's the exact point where most people quit, but if you lean into it, if you stay with it, something powerful happens, you get stronger, and pretty soon, what used to feel heavy becomes your new normal, not because the resistance disappeared, but because you adapted, you leveled up, and now you're ready for more. That's how evolution works. It doesn't happen all at once, it happens every time you choose not to run from the resistance. Stuck doesn't stay neutral, it might feel like you're just sitting still, just taking a break, just waiting for the right time. But the truth is, stuck doesn't freeze you in place, it slowly pulls you backward. Not in one dramatic fall, but in small quiet steps. At first nothing looks different, you take a few days off from the habit, from the discipline, from the decision you said you'd make. It doesn't feel like a big deal. You tell yourself you'll get back to it, but the longer you stay still, the heavier it gets, and before you know it, you're no longer taking a break. You're building a pattern. You don't lose momentum all at once. You lose it gradually, you stop moving, and over time you stop believing. You stop expecting, you stop reaching. That's the danger of staying stuck. It teaches you to settle, it lowers the bar without telling you it's doing it. And once your standard drops, everything else follows. I've seen it happen in people's careers. They get frustrated, so they pause, but the pause turns into a pattern. They stop growing, stop learning, stop stretching, and after a while, they don't just lose their edge, they lose their confidence, they forget they ever had momentum in the first place. The same thing happens in relationships and health and finances. You delay the hard conversation. You skip the workout, you avoid the budget, and each time you do, the cost builds. Not loud, not obvious, but slow and steady, and that's what makes it dangerous. You don't feel stuck at first, but one day you look around and realize you've settled into a version of life you never meant to accept. Here's the reality. Stuck has gravity. The longer you stay there, the harder it is to pull away. Not because you can't, but because your identity starts to shrink. You start believing this is just how it is now. Not because it's true, but because you've rehearsed it long enough for it to feel true, and the hardest part, you get used to it. Stuck becomes routine. You stop asking for more, you stop stretching, you stop imagining something better. And when that happens, it's not just your goals that fade, it's your sense of possibility. But here's the good news, you can break it, you can interrupt the pattern. You don't need to rebuild everything overnight, you just need to move a small step. A shift in direction, something that says you're not staying here. And when you move, even slightly, stuck loses its grip. Because stuck is only strong when you're still. Once you start moving, once you start choosing action over waiting, it begins to weaken, and you begin to remember what momentum feels like. Not because everything's fixed, but because you stopped agreeing with where you were. The hardest part is starting. Always is that first move feels heavier than it should. The first rep, the first conversation, the first decision, it carries more weight. Because you're breaking through inertia. But here's the good news, once you move, everything starts to shift. People wait for clarity before they act. They wait for motivation, they wait to feel ready, but what they don't realize is that clarity doesn't come before action, it comes because of it. You don't see the full path before you start walking, you take a few steps and the path starts to show itself. That's how it works, and the longer you wait, the heavier it feels. The more you hesitate, the more resistance builds. That's why people say they don't know what happened. They just lost momentum, but they didn't lose momentum, they postponed it, delayed it. Sat still so long the starting line disappeared under their feet. But the second you move, something changes, even if it's small, even if it's messy. Even if you're not ready, that one action breaks the silence, it interrupts the pattern. It signals that you're not staying here, and that alone starts to rebuild your confidence. I've seen people stay stuck 4 years and then in 1 week of consistent movement, they start to come back to life, not because everything is fixed but because they stopped agreeing with the idea that nothing could change. They took action. And action has a voice. It tells your mind that you're not finished. The best part: action gets easier the more you take it. The first rep is heavy, the 5th is smoother. By the 50th it's normal, not because the weight changed but because you did. Because momentum starts working for you instead of against you. And all you had to do was show up enough times to let it build. Discomfort doesn't vanish the moment you act, but it gets lighter. You shift from helpless to engaged, from frozen to focused, and suddenly the thing you were dreading becomes the thing you're handling, not because it stopped being uncomfortable, but because you stopped being afraid of discomfort. So if you've been waiting for the right time to move, this is it. The sooner you take a step, the sooner the resistance begins to shrink. The sooner the fog starts to lift, the sooner you begin building a version of yourself you actually want to be, because change will never feel easier before you begin. It only feels easier after. Movement is what makes it possible. Momentum is what makes it sustainable, and the sooner you move, the sooner both begin working in your favor. Discomfort is part of the deal. There's no way around it. You either face the discomfort of change, or you carry the weight of staying stuck, but you can't avoid it entirely. One hurts now, the other hurts forever. Most people spend their lives trying to dodge pain, but here's what they don't realize. Doing nothing is also doing something. Avoiding the hard choice is still a choice. And it comes with a cost. You pay for it in frustration, in missed opportunity, in time you can't get back. You'll be uncomfortable either way. The question is, does your discomfort lead anywhere? Does it build something, or does it just repeat the same patterns day after day, year after year? One kind of discomfort makes you stronger, the other just wears you down. So if you're stuck right now, if change feels heavy, don't wait for it to feel light. Don't wait for it to feel safe. Step into the resistance, not because it's easy, but because it leads somewhere. Because discomfort with a purpose is better than comfort with regret. You don't have to know the whole path, you just need to take the first step and then the next. Because every time you move, the weight shifts, and little by little you start trading stuckness for progress, confusion for clarity, hesitation for momentum. You're going to face discomfort either way, might as well make it count. They haven't drawn the line, they haven't made a firm final choice about who they are and what kind of life they're going to live. So they move with the wind, whatever feels good, whatever's convenient, whatever the mood says. And they wonder why things never stick, why nothing lasts, why they keep starting over. But here's the truth: everything changes the day you decide, not wish, not hope. You decide who you are, what you'll stand for, what you'll no longer tolerate, what the future is going to look like, and from that moment forward, you don't negotiate with anything that threatens it. That's where power comes from. Not from emotion, not from chance, from a decision. You don't need a better routine, you don't need another plan, you need to settle something once and for all. Who are you going to be? Not someday, now, and once that's clear, you build your days around it. You protect it, you reinforce it, you get up each morning and act like it's already done. Because if you keep waiting to feel like that person, you never will. You have to become it by choice. The people who change the direction of their lives don't do it accidentally. They don't stumble into discipline, they don't trip over identity, they decide and then they don't budge. They're not perfect, they're not always motivated, but they're steady, they're rooted. And because of that, they grow slowly at first, then unmistakably. So that's what this is about: making a clear decision and holding to it. No flinching, no bargaining, no wavering just because the mood changes. Because if you can do that, if you can decide who you want to be and refuse to move, you'll build something most people never will: a life that's grounded, a future that's solid, and a character that can't be shaken. Indecision wears people down. Not all at once, but slowly, a little doubt here, a little hesitation there. You wake up with good intentions but spend half the day debating with yourself. Should I go all in? Should I wait? Is this really the right time? And before you know it, the day's gone, the energy's gone, and nothing got done. That's what indecision does, it steals from you quietly. And the worst part, most people don't even realize it's happening. They think they're just being thoughtful, cautious, Careful, but in reality they're stuck not because they lack the ability, but because they haven't made a clear decision about who they are, so everything feels like a negotiation. Every day starts with a maybe, every choice feels heavy, and that internal back and forth becomes exhausting. But the moment you really decide, something changes, the noise quiets, the tension drops. There's no more debate, you don't wake up wondering who you are or what you're about, you already settled that. Now the only question is, what does that kind of person do today? And suddenly the path gets clearer. See, clarity ends the conflict when you decide who you wanna be. You stop entertaining every option, you stop running every decision through 10 different filters. You stop chasing every shiny distraction, you've already got your compass, you've already chosen your direction. And that direction makes decisions easier, simpler, quieter. It doesn't mean life gets easy, it means you stop wasting energy on things that don't match your identity. You stop second-guessing every move, you stop trying to please everyone, you live from the inside out. Not the outside in, because once you know who you are, the rest of the world doesn't get a vote. I've watched people transform. Not because they learned something new, but because they finally decided, they drew the line, they said, "That's who I used to be, this is who I am now," and from that moment on, everything lined up behind that decision, their habits, their standards, their mindset, their pace. And here's the beautiful part. You don't need anyone's permission to make that decision, you don't need to be perfect first, you don't need a new title or a new job, or a clean history. All you need is the willingness to choose, to stop living in the gray, to stop trying to keep every option open and just decide. Because until you do, every day will feel like a tug of war, a little progress, then a step back. A little clarity, then more questions, but once you decide, really decide, that conflict ends, and all that energy you were spending on indecision, it gets redirected into forward motion. So don't wait for clarity to show up on its own, create it, choose it. And once you do, don't budge. Once you've made the decision, once you've said that this is who you are, everything else starts lining up, not because the world changes, but because your standards do. You stop making decisions based on mood. You stop negotiating with old habits, you start asking one question: what would the person I've committed to being do right now? And you act on that. Identity becomes the filter. Not feelings, not convenience, not pressure, identity. You've already decided who you are, and now that decision makes your choices for you. That's the power of it, it removes the back and forth, it shuts down the excuses. Because if it doesn't match the standard, you don't do it. You don't need rules when identity is in place, you don't need reminders, you don't need hype. You just follow through because that's what the person you've decided to be would do, and the more you do that, the stronger that identity becomes. It starts out as a choice, but over time it becomes who you are. It's like this. If you decide you're the kind of person who's on time, guess what? You show up early. Not because someone's watching, but because that's your standard. If you decide you're the kind of person who finishes what you start, then quitting isn't even on the table. Not because it's forbidden, but because it's not who you are. People struggle with discipline because they haven't locked in their identity, they're still making decisions based on how they feel. But once the identity is set, everything else gets easier. You don't need to ask yourself every day if you should do it, you already know. You're just living out what you've already decided. That's what makes habits stick. Not motivation, not streaks, identity. When the habit becomes part of how you see yourself, you don't have to drag yourself into it, you don't wrestle with the decision, you do it because it's part of you. And that's how real transformation happens, not from massive effort, but from consistent alignment. You've probably seen someone with that kind of clarity. They're not the loudest, they don't talk about discipline, but it's obvious they've made a decision. You can see it in the way they show up, in the way they carry themselves. There's no debate in their voice, no need for approval. They've already settled the question, and everything they do lines up behind it. So if you wanna raise your discipline, raise your identity, decide who you are, and let that decision set the standard. Not once in a while, not when it's easy, but every day, especially when it's inconvenient. Cause that's how strength is built. Through repetition, through integrity, through alignment between who you say you are and what you actually do. And once that identity is locked in, you don't budge, you don't revisit the decision. You just keep proving it over and over again, quietly, consistently, without needing permission. Most people live on emotional autopilot. If they feel good, they follow through. If they feel tired, they take the day off. If they feel motivated, they show up strong. If they feel discouraged, they disappear. And they wonder why nothing sticks, why the results come and go, why the progress never lasts. Here's the reason: emotion is running the show, and emotion is unreliable. It changes based on the weather, the mood, the sleep, the schedule. It's not stable. It's not steady, so if emotion is driving your direction, will always drift. You'll start and stop, speed up, then stall, and every time life throws a feeling at you, you'll follow it off course. But once you decide who you are, emotion can't drive anymore. It still rides with you, it still talks, but it doesn't get to touch the wheel. You still feel frustration, you still feel doubt, you still feel tired. But none of those feelings make the decisions anymore. Identity does. You already settled the question. And because of that, emotion becomes background noise. You might hear it, you might notice it. But it doesn't move you. You keep showing up because the decision's already been made. The standard's already been set. The action isn't based on how you feel, it's based on who you are. That's the difference between those who build something lasting and those who start over every few weeks. The ones who last, they don't need to feel great every morning. They've trained themselves to act without asking permission from their emotions, and because of that they're steady. They're predictable, they're reliable, not just to others but to themselves. This isn't about ignoring your emotions, it's about putting them in their place. Let them inform you but not direct you. Let them speak but don't let them vote, because if you let them run your life, they'll lead you straight into inconsistency. But if you let identity lead, if you let the decision speak louder than the feeling, you stay grounded. I've had days where I didn't want to do the work, didn't want to write, didn't want to speak, didn't want to stay on track, and if I had listened to that emotion, I'd have broken the habit. I'd have lost the momentum, but because I'd already decided who I was, because I'd already committed to the identity, I did it anyway. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not with enthusiasm, but I did it, and that kept the standard intact. That's how you win long term, not by feeling amazing every day, not by eliminating emotion, but by acting from your decision, not your mood. And the more you do that, the easier it gets. The emotion shows up and you keep going. The doubt creeps in and you stay locked in. The resistance rises and you move anyway. Because identity is stable even when emotion isn't. And when that becomes your pattern, when emotion can scream and you still follow through, that's when you know you've taken control, not of everything around you but of yourself. And that's where real freedom comes from. Sooner or later the world will test you. It'll push not just once but over and over. People will question you, circumstances will shift. Life will get loud, messy, inconvenient, and that's when most people fold. Not because they didn't care but because they didn't anchor deep enough. They hadn't made the kind of decision that holds its ground. See, it's easy to be consistent when everything's going your way, easy to stay focused when the mood is right and the schedule's clear, but real identity gets tested when things go sideways. When progress stalls, when nobody's watching, when the feedback disappears and the pressure shows up. That's where you find out if the decision you made was real or just a preference. If your identity is negotiable, the world will negotiate it for you. A tough week will convince you to lower your standard. A few critics will talk you out of your path. A missed result will make you question the whole thing. But if your decision is non-negotiable, if it's locked in, none of those things move you. They still show up, but they don't shake your ground. You're not adjusting your standard to fit the day. You're adjusting your day to meet the standard because you already know who you are and you don't change who you are just because the world got louder. That's what real clarity does. It makes you immovable. You don't need approval. You don't need perfect conditions. You just keep showing up because the decision's already been made. And when people try to pull you off track, when distractions or doubts or delays try to talk you out of it, you don't flinch. You just keep proving it. You know what kind of person you're going to be in a crisis, the same one you decided to be before the crisis showed up. You know how you'll respond to pressure, however you trained yourself to respond when things were calm. Because the world doesn't give you time to choose in the moment, it just hits, and whatever decision you've already made, That's what you'll fall back on. That's why most people never build anything that lasts. They keep revisiting the decision they commit on Monday and question it by Friday. They let pressure edit the standard, but when you decide once and refuse to budge, that decision holds when the world pushes. That's what separates people who last from people who almost did. And here's what happens when you stop flinching. People start trusting you, not just with words but with opportunity. With responsibility, because they see you're steady, you're clear. You don't shift with the wind, you're not chasing approval, you're not reacting to every voice. You're grounded, and that kind of person becomes rare, valuable, respected. Not because they shouted louder but because they didn't move. So expect the world to push, expect tests, noise and resistance. But decide now that it won't change who you are. You've already made the call. You've already set the standard. The world will try to move you, but you don't move. When you stop flinching, everything starts compounding. The habits stick, the progress holds. The results don't just show up, they multiply, not because you had perfect strategy or endless motivation, but because you stayed the same when everything else tried to shake you. That kind of consistency does more than build success, it builds strength. Every time you follow through when it would have been easier to fold, you stack credibility with yourself. And that credibility becomes confidence, quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't need attention. The kind that doesn't need applause. It comes from knowing you did what you said you do. You kept the promise, you didn't move, and over time, that builds something very few people ever experience: trust, not just trust from others, but trust in yourself. You don't second guess your direction anymore. You don't hesitate when things get difficult. You know who you are, and that knowing becomes your advantage while everyone else is reacting, shifting, questioning. You're steady. That's what people start to see. That's what opens doors, not talent, not charm, steadiness. The ability to stay the same person in every room, every situation. Someone who doesn't crumble under pressure, someone who doesn't lower their standard when no one's looking. That kind of person becomes rare. And when something becomes rare, it becomes valuable. And the beautiful part, you don't have to wait years to feel it. The moment you stop flinching, you start winning. Maybe not on the outside, not right away, but internally something shifts. You stop negotiating with weakness. You stop performing for approval. You stop chasing shortcuts, and suddenly your energy changes. Your focus sharpens, your pace steadies. And that change bleeds into everything: your relationships, your work, your health, your thinking. Because when your identity is locked, everything else follows its lead. You don't keep circling the same problems. You don't keep hitting reset every few weeks. You move forward, and forward feels good. Not because it's easy, but because it's solid. People ask how they stay consistent. You stop making the decision every day, you make it once. You build your life around it, you build your habits around it. And you don't move no matter how long it takes, no matter who doubts you, no matter how you feel. And if you do that long enough, you start to feel something most people never get to feel: peace. Not peace because life got quiet, peace because you got stable, because you no longer live at the mercy of moods or pressure or delay. You live on purpose, and that purpose shows up in everything you do. So if you've made the decision, hold it, guard it, prove it over and over. Until you don't have to explain yourself anymore, because people will see it, and more importantly, you'll feel it.